She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just stood there barefoot, shaking, and asked the most dangerous man in the restaurant if she could eat what he was done with. When he looked up and asked where her parents were, the room went cold, because that question was about to ruin lives. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. Hunger has a sound, not the kind you hear in your stomach, the embarrassing growl during a quiet meeting or the rumble before lunch. No, the hunger that Ivana Martins knew had a different voice entirely. It was the sound of a door locking from the outside, the scrape of a plate being taken away before she'd finished, the echo of footsteps walking past her room without stopping. It was silence, mostly. The kind that filled spaces where comfort should have been. By 9 years old, Ivana had learned more about survival than most adults ever would. She knew which floorboards creaked and which could be trusted. She knew how to make herself small enough to be forgotten, quiet enough to be overlooked. She knew that crying was a luxury she couldn't afford, because crying meant consequences. Crying meant no dinner. The house she lived in wasn't particularly large, but it felt cavernous in its coldness. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disappointment. Her adoptive parents, Richard and Regina Hendricks, had taken her in 2 years ago. Not out of love, not even out of obligation. They'd taken her in because the state paid them to, and because having a child looked good on paper. In practice, Ivana was more like an inconvenient tenant, one who didn't pay rent and occasionally required feeding. Richard worked in insurance, something vague that Ivana never fully understood. He was a heavy man with thinning hair and a voice that carried through walls even when he wasn't shouting. Regina was thin in the way that made people uncomfortable, all sharp angles and sharper words. She wore her disappointment like perfume, and it clung to everything. They had rules. So many rules. No speaking at the dinner table unless spoken to. No leaving your room after 8 p.m. No crying, ever. No wasting food even if you're still hungry. That last one was Ivana's favorite kind of cruel, because there was never enough food to waste in the first place. Tonight had started like most nights, Richard's voice booming from downstairs about something on the news, Regina's heels clicking against the kitchen tile as she moved between the stove and the table, the smell of pot roast drifting upstairs, rich, savory, taunting. Ivana had been sent to her room an hour before dinner. Her crime? Asking if she could have a snack after school. Regina had looked at her like she'd requested a diamond necklace. "You'll eat when we eat," she'd said, her lips pressed into a thin line. If you eat. The if hung in the air like a threat. So Ivana had climbed the stairs to her small room at the end of the hall, closed the door, and waited. She sat on the edge of her bed, a mattress that sagged in the middle, covered with a quilt that had been donated along with her, and listened to the sounds of dinner happening without her. Silverware on plates, low conversation. Regina's occasional laugh, sharp and mirthless. Her stomach twisted, not just with hunger, though that was certainly there, but with something worse. The understanding that she didn't matter. Not to them, not to anyone. By the time the house went quiet, Richard snoring drifting from the master bedroom, Regina's sleeping pills doing their nightly work, Ivana had made a decision. She couldn't stay here anymore. Not tonight. The thought terrified her, but hunger was louder than fear now. She moved carefully, the way she'd learned to move in this house. Every step calculated, every breath measured. She pulled on the olive green sweater that hung too loose on her frame, the one with the stretched collar and the small tear near the hem. It had been her mother's once, though that memory was fading now, becoming more feeling than image. Her shoes were downstairs by the front door. She couldn't risk it. Barefoot it would be. The hallway stretched before her like a test. She avoided the 3rd floorboard, it creaked. Hugged the wall past Richard and Regina's room. Held her breath at the top of the stairs. The descent took forever, each step a small eternity. But finally, she reached the bottom. The back door was her exit. It didn't have the deadbolt that the front door had, just a simple lock that turned with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Ivana froze, waited, listened. Nothing. She pulled the door open, slipped through, and closed it behind her with the kind of care usually reserved for diffusing bombs. The night air hit her immediately, cold, sharp, unforgiving. October had arrived with teeth, and she had no jacket. Just the sweater and the thin pajama pants she'd been wearing when Regina sent her upstairs. But she was out. That's what mattered. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights cast long shadows across cracked sidewalks. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Ivana started walking, not because she knew where she was going, but because standing still felt like giving up. Her feet ached almost immediately. The pavement was rough, littered with small stones and bits of broken glass that caught the light. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, following the glow of the city ahead. She didn't know what she was looking for. Safety, maybe. Food, definitely. Someone who might see her as more than a burden. The streets grew busier as she walked. More lights, more people. Restaurants with outdoor seating where couples lingered over wine. Coffee shops with warm yellow windows and the scent of pastries drifting out every time the door opened. Ivana's stomach clenched. She passed a bakery first closed, but the smell still lingered in the air. Then a pizza place where teenagers laughed too loud and threw napkins at each other. Then a small cafe where an elderly couple shared dessert, their hands intertwined across the table. And then she saw it. Luminesca. The name glowed in elegant gold script above double glass doors. Through the windows, she could see a world that seemed impossible. Chandeliers dripping with crystal. Tables set with more silverware than she knew what to do with. Servers in crisp white shirts moving between guests with the kind of grace that suggested everything was under control. And the food. God. The food. Even from outside, even through the glass, she could see it. Plates piled with things she couldn't name but desperately wanted. Steam rising from bowls. Glasses of wine catching the light like liquid rubies. Ivana's feet carried her forward before her mind could protest. She pushed open the door, and warmth enveloped her like an embrace she'd forgotten existed. The smell hit her so hard she almost staggered. Rosemary, garlic, butter, something sweet and dark like chocolate. A hostess looked up, startled. Her smile faltered. "Can I?" But Ivana was already moving past her, drawn deeper into the restaurant by something she couldn't name. Desperation, maybe, or hope, or just the simple, animal need to survive. She wove between tables, small enough to slip through spaces meant for servers. Some diners glanced at her quick, uncomfortable looks before returning to their meals. Others didn't notice at all, and then she saw him, a man sitting alone near the back of the restaurant. Dark hair, sharp jaw, tattoos crawling up his neck from beneath a white collar. His suit jacket hung on the chair behind him. His plate was still half full: filet mignon, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes that looked like clouds. He wasn't eating anymore, just staring at his wineglass like it held answers. Ivana approached slowly, each step heavier than the last. When she reached his table, she stopped, waited. He didn't look up immediately. She cleared her throat, barely a sound at all. His eyes lifted, dark, unreadable, patient. And Ivana, exhausted and terrified and so desperately hungry she could barely think straight, whispered the words that would change everything. "Sir, can I have the leftover food?" The restaurant didn't go completely silent. That only happened in movies. But something shifted. A ripple of awareness that moved through the room like a cold draft. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted. Forks paused halfway to mouths. A woman in a red dress leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind her hand. A businessman 2 tables over frowned into his scotch, clearly annoyed by the interruption to his evening's ambiance. The hostess who'd tried to intercept Ivana earlier was now moving toward them with quick, apologetic steps, her professional smile tight with concern. But Aaron Calvo held up a single hand without looking away from the child in front of him. The hostess stopped mid-stride, hesitated, then retreated. That's when Ivana understood, in some instinctive way that children often do, that this man was different. Not because he was kind, she hadn't determined that yet, but because when he gestured, people obeyed without question. Aaron studied her with the kind of attention that made her want to disappear, not the cruel scrutiny she was used to from Regina, who looked at her like she was calculating the cost of her existence. This was something else. Something that felt like he was reading a story written on her skin. His eyes moved from her face to her bare feet, lingering there for just a moment, then up to the too large sweater with its frayed edges. The way she held her hands clasped in front of her, knuckles white with tension. The hollowness in her cheeks that spoke of missed meals, many of them. "What's your name?" His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. Ivana swallowed. "Ivana. Ivana." He repeated it like he was committing it to memory. "How old are you?" 9. A muscle in his jaw tightened. It was subtle, most people wouldn't have noticed. But Ivana had spent 2 years learning to read the small signs that preceded violence or coldness or punishment. She braced herself. But he didn't yell, didn't wave her away, didn't do any of the things she'd been half expecting. Instead, he pushed his chair back slightly and gestured to the seat across from him. Sit. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't cruel either. Just certain. Ivana glanced around the restaurant nervously. This felt wrong somehow, like she was breaking a rule she didn't know existed. But hunger won out over fear, the way it always did eventually. She slid into the chair, her feet dangling well above the floor. The leather was soft, softer than anything in the Hendricks house. The table was pristine white linen, and she was suddenly, painfully aware of how dirty she must look against it. Aaron didn't seem to care. He lifted 2 fingers, and a waiter appeared almost immediately, a young man with slicked hair and a nervous energy that suggested he knew exactly who he was serving. Yes, sir? Another plate. The child's menu if you have it. If not, bring her what I'm having. And water. Bread while we wait. Right away, Mr. Calvo. The waiter disappeared with the kind of speed usually reserved for emergencies. Mr. Calvo. So that was his name. Ivana's hands were shaking now that she was sitting down. The adrenaline that had carried her through the cold streets and into this impossible restaurant was wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. You can have this while you wait, Aaron said, pushing his own plate toward her. I'm finished. She stared at the food. Half a filet mignon, still pink in the center. Roasted carrots glazed with something that made them shine. Mashed potatoes with a small pool of melted butter in the center. More food than she'd seen on one plate in weeks. Go ahead. Ivana picked up the fork. It was heavy, real silver maybe. She cut a small piece of steak, brought it to her mouth, and nearly cried at the taste. It was tender, seasoned with something smoky and perfect. She'd forgotten food could taste like this, like someone cared about it. She forced herself to chew slowly, to not devour it like an animal, even though every instinct screamed at her to eat faster before someone took it away. Aaron watched her without speaking. He wasn't staring exactly, but his attention never left her. After a moment, he leaned back in his chair and took a slow sip of his wine. Around them, the restaurant had mostly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Silverware clinked against plates. The piano player in the corner started another soft jazz number. But several people were still watching their table. A waiter whispered something to the bartender. An older gentleman in a gray suit kept glancing over with an expression that might have been concern or might have been calculation. Everyone seemed to know who Aaron Calvo was. Everyone except Ivana. She didn't know that he owned 3 restaurants in the city, including this one. Didn't know that his name appeared in police reports and city council meetings with equal frequency. Didn't know that the tattoos climbing his neck weren't artistic choices but a map of allegiances, territories, debts paid and owed. She didn't know that most people who sat across from him at a table did so because they'd been summoned, and they rarely left feeling relieved. All she knew was that he'd given her food without asking for anything in return. And that alone made him different from almost every adult in her life. The bread arrived first, a basket of warm rolls with butter that was actually soft enough to spread. Ivana took one, then glanced up at Aaron as if asking permission. He nodded once. She ate 3 rolls before the main course arrived. A plate even larger than his had been chicken in some kind of cream sauce, green beans, more mashed potatoes. The waiter set it down carefully, along with a glass of water that had a lemon wedge perched on the rim like a tiny yellow boat. Anything else, sir? Aaron shook his head. The waiter retreated. For several minutes, the only sound between them was Ivana eating. She tried to maintain some dignity, some pretense of manners, but it was difficult when your body was screaming that this might be your only meal for days. Aaron waited. Patient, still, like he had all the time in the world. Finally, when Ivana had eaten enough to dull the sharp edge of starvation, he spoke again. His voice was still quiet, but there was something harder in it now. Something that made her look up from her plate. Ivana, he said slowly, precisely. Why aren't you eating at home? The question hung in the air between them. Ivana's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She could feel her throat tightening. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the moment when she'd have to explain. And explaining meant either being sent back or being called a liar. She set the fork down carefully, stared at her plate. They don't let me, she whispered. Aaron's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and sharp and decided. Who are they? Ivana's hands twisted in her lap. The people I live with. Your parents? She shook her head quickly. Adoptive. Foster. I don't know what the right word is. Aaron leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table. And they don't feed you? Sometimes they do. She stopped, started again. When I'm good. That muscle in his jaw tightened again. His fingers, resting on the table, curled into a loose fist before deliberately relaxing. I see. Those 2 words carried more weight than entire speeches Ivana had heard. The silence that followed those 2 words, I see, felt different from any silence Ivana had experienced before. It wasn't the silence of being ignored, like when Regina walked past her room without acknowledging her presence. It wasn't the silence of fear, like when Richard's voice rose and then suddenly cut off, leaving only the threat of what came next. This was the silence of decision, of something being weighed and measured and found wanting. Aaron's eyes hadn't left her face, but Ivana could sense his mind working behind them, processing information she hadn't even fully shared yet. It unnerved her, this attention. She'd spent so long trying to be invisible that being truly seen felt almost painful. How long have you lived with them? He asked. 2 years, almost. And the not feeding you, is that new? Ivana hesitated. The chicken on her plate was getting cold, but she'd lost her appetite somewhere in the last 30 seconds. It started, maybe 6 months ago, when I talked back about something. I don't even remember what. After that, it just became, she searched for the right word, normal. Normal, Aaron repeated, and the word sounded wrong in his mouth, like he was tasting something rotten. A server approached the table different from the one before. An older woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She set down a fresh glass of water for Ivana without being asked, and glanced at Aaron with a question in her expression. We're fine, Maria, he said quietly. Maria nodded, but before she left, her gaze dropped to Ivana's bare feet, visible beneath the table. Her lips pressed together in a thin line, and something that might have been anger or sadness flickered across her face. She walked away without a word, but Ivana noticed her whisper something to another server near the kitchen doors. The staff knew something was wrong. They just didn't know what to do about it. Aaron noticed too. He always noticed everything. Ivana was beginning to understand that about him. Are you cold? He asked. Ivana shook her head, even though she was. The restaurant was warm compared to outside, but her feet were still numb, and the sweater did little against the chill that had settled into her bones during the walk here. Without a word, Aaron stood and retrieved his suit jacket from the back of his chair. He moved around the table and draped it over her shoulders. It was massive on her, the sleeves hanging well past her hands, but it was warm and smelled like expensive cologne and something else, leather maybe, or wood smoke. Thank you, she whispered. He returned to his seat and picked up his wine glass, studying her over the rim as he took a slow sip. You said they don't let you eat when you're not good. What does that mean exactly? Ivana pulled the jacket tighter around herself. If I cry, or if I ask for things, or if I... Her voice got smaller. If I exist too loudly, I guess. Exist too loudly, Aaron echoed. He set his glass down with deliberate care. And tonight? What did you do tonight? I asked if I could have a snack after school. The admission felt shameful somehow, like confessing to a crime. Regina, that's the mom. She said I'd eat when they ate. If I ate. Then she sent me to my room. And did you? Eat with them? Ivana shook her head. Why not? I wasn't invited down. Aaron's jaw tightened again, that same muscle flexing beneath his skin. His fingers drummed once against the table, a single, controlled gesture that somehow conveyed more anger than shouting would have. So you decided to leave? It wasn't a question, but Ivana nodded anyway. I waited until they were asleep. I couldn't. Her throat tightened around the words. I was so hungry. How long since you'd eaten? Really eaten? 3 days, maybe. I had some crackers yesterday that I'd hidden. Something shifted in Aaron's expression. The controlled neutrality cracked just slightly, revealing something harder beneath. Something that made Ivana think of storms gathering on distant horizons. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to somewhere past her shoulder, like he was calculating something. When he looked at her again, his voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Show me your arms. Ivana froze. What? Your arms. Show me. Her heart started pounding. She knew what he'd see. She'd been so careful to keep the sleeves pulled down, to hide the evidence of her existence in that house. Ivana. His voice was firmer now, but not unkind. Show me. Slowly, reluctantly, she pulled back the sleeve of her sweater on her left arm, then the sleeve of his jacket. The bruises were there, exactly where she knew they'd be. Yellow-green ones that were almost healed, darker purple ones that were newer. finger-shaped marks where Regina had grabbed her too hard 3 days ago, a scratch near her wrist from being shoved against the doorframe. Aaron's expression didn't change. He simply looked, taking inventory with the same careful attention he'd given everything else. Then his eyes moved to her other arm, still covered. That one too. She revealed the right arm. More of the same. For a long moment, Aaron said nothing. He just sat there, looking at evidence of cruelty written on the skin of a 9-year-old child. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost missed it. I see. Those words again. But this time, they sounded like a verdict. He pulled out his phone, sleek, black, expensive, and typed something quickly. A message sent. Then he set it face down on the table and looked at Ivana again. You're not going back there tonight. Ivana blinked. What? To that house. You're not going back. Not tonight. Not ever if I can help it. But... Her mind raced. They'll call the police. They'll say I ran away. They'll... Let them. Aaron's voice cut through her panic cleanly. Let them call whoever they want. A waiter appeared again, the young one from before. He leaned down and whispered something near Aaron's ear. Aaron nodded once, and the waiter retreated. Ivana's hands were shaking again. I don't understand. You don't need to. Not yet. He stood, pulling out his wallet and laying several bills on the table, far more than the meal could have cost. Right now, you need to come with me. Where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere warm. Somewhere you can sleep without being afraid. He gestured toward the door. Someone's waiting outside. Her name is Evelyn. She's going to take you somewhere for tonight. Ivana didn't move. Every instinct told her not to trust adults who made promises. Adults who said things like, somewhere safe and you'll be fine. Aaron seemed to sense her hesitation. He crouched down so they were at eye level, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Ivana, he said slowly, carefully. I know you don't know me. I know you have no reason to trust what I'm saying. But I'm going to ask you to trust me anyway. Can you do that? She wanted to say no, wanted to run. But she was so tired, so hungry still, despite the food, so desperate for someone to mean what they said. What about them? She whispered. Richard and Regina? Aaron's expression hardened into something that was almost frightening. Don't worry about them, he said quietly. I'll handle it. Evelyn turned out to be a woman in her mid-40s with warm brown eyes and silver threading through her dark hair. She wore jeans and a soft cardigan, and when she smiled at Ivana through the window of a black sedan parked outside Luminesca, it was the kind of smile that actually reached her eyes. You must be Ivana, she said gently, opening the back door. I'm Evelyn. I work with Mr. Calvo sometimes. He called and said you needed a safe place tonight. Ivana glanced back at the restaurant. Through the glass, she could see Aaron speaking with someone, a tall man in a dark coat, who'd appeared seemingly from nowhere. They were talking in low voices, Aaron's expression unreadable. He's not coming? Ivana asked. Evelyn shook her head. He has some things to take care of. But you'll be safe with me, I promise. I have a guest room all set up, clean sheets, warm blankets, and if you're still hungry, I make a mean hot chocolate. The mention of hot chocolate did something to Ivana's resolve. She climbed into the car, still wearing Aaron's jacket, and buckled herself in. As they pulled away from the restaurant, Ivana watched the golden lights of Luminesca fade into the distance, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. Wondering if this was somehow worse than the Hendricks house. Wondering if safety was even something that existed for girls like her. Evelyn's apartment was nothing like Ivana expected. It was small but impossibly warm, filled with plants on every available surface, and photographs on the walls, family gatherings, beach vacations, a young girl blowing out birthday candles. That's my daughter, Sophia, Evelyn said, noticing Ivana's gaze. She's at university now, studying medicine. I miss her every day, but I'm so proud. She led Ivana to a bedroom that looked like it had been waiting for someone. The bed was made with a thick comforter in soft blues and greens. There was a small lamp on the nightstand, a shelf of books, even a stuffed bear sitting against the pillows. The bathroom's right through there, Evelyn pointed. There's a new toothbrush in the drawer, and towels if you want a shower. No pressure, though. Would you like that hot chocolate first? Ivana nodded, not trusting her voice. 10 minutes later, she was sitting at Evelyn's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate that was so rich and sweet it almost hurt. Evelyn had added marshmallows, real ones, not the tiny hard ones from a package. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said gently, sitting down across from her with her own mug. Ivana tensed. Okay. When was the last time someone was kind to you? Really kind? Without wanting something back? The question caught Ivana off guard. She stared into her hot chocolate, watching the marshmallows slowly dissolve. I don't remember, she finally whispered. Evelyn's expression softened with something that looked like heartbreak. I'm sorry. That's not right. That's not how children should grow up. It's fine, Ivana said automatically, the way she'd learned to say it. I'm fine. No, honey, it's not fine. And neither are you. Not yet. Evelyn reached across the table but stopped short of touching her, giving Ivana the space to decide. But you will be. I promise you that. Ivana wanted to believe her. God, she wanted to believe her so badly. What happens tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow we figure things out. But tonight you sleep. Really sleep. Without being afraid. Can you try to do that? Ivana nodded, even though she wasn't sure she remembered how. She showered the first real shower in days, where she didn't have to rush, where the water stayed hot, where there was actual shampoo that smelled like vanilla. She put on the oversized t-shirt Evelyn had left for her and climbed into the guest bed. The sheets were soft. The pillow was thick. The room was dark but not frightening. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ivana cried. Not from pain or fear or hunger, but from relief. From the overwhelming realization that someone had seen her suffering and decided to do something about it. She cried until she fell asleep, and even then, her dreams were gentler than they'd been in months. While Ivana slept, Aaron Calvo sat in his car outside the Hendricks house. It was 2:47 a.m. The neighborhood was silent except for the occasional dog bark or car passing in the distance. The house itself was dark, every window black except for a faint glow from what might have been a nightlight in the upstairs hallway. This was the kind of house that existed in every city, modest, forgettable, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business and no one asked too many questions. Perfect for hiding cruelty in plain sight. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Tobias, his right hand for the past decade. Tobias was built like a wall and spoke less than most people breathed, but his loyalty was absolute. You sure about this? Tobias asked quietly. Aaron didn't take his eyes off the house. I'm sure. Could just call child services. Let them handle it. And have her stuck in the system for months while they investigate? While those people get to tell their side of the story and play the victims? Aaron's jaw tightened. No. This gets handled tonight. Tobias nodded slowly. He knew better than to argue when Aaron's mind was made up. You saw the bruises, Aaron continued, his voice low and hard. You saw how she flinched when I moved too fast. How she apologized for existing. That kind of damage doesn't come from one bad night. That's systematic, prolonged. I saw. So we handle it, quietly, permanently. Tobias was quiet for a moment. You're thinking about him again. Your old man. Aaron's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Don't. Just saying. I know what this looks like to you. Know why it matters. It matters because she's 9 years old, and she was begging for scraps like a dog. Aaron's voice was razor sharp now. It matters because those people took state money to care for her and used it to starve her instead. It matters because if we don't stop them, they'll do it to the next kid too. All right. Tobias opened his door. Let's go remind them what consequences look like. They approached the house like shadows, silent, purposeful. Aaron had learned long ago that fear was most effective when delivered calmly. Violence had its place, but terror? Terror came from certainty, from knowing that someone could hurt you and choosing not to this time. Tobias knocked on the front door. Not aggressive pounding, just a firm, steady knock, the kind that suggested whoever was on the other side wasn't going away. It took 3 rounds of knocking before a light flickered on upstairs. Footsteps on stairs, the scrape of a chain lock. The door opened 6 inches, and Richard Hendricks peered through the gap, his face slack with sleep and confusion. He was wearing a stained t-shirt and boxer shorts, his thinning hair standing up at odd angles. What the hell? He started. Then he saw Aaron's face in the porch light, and whatever he'd been about to say died in his throat. Because even people like Richard Hendricks, people who existed in the boring suburbs and worked boring insurance jobs, had heard the name Calvo, had heard the stories, had enough sense to recognize danger when it stood on their doorstep at 3 a.m. We need to talk, Aaron said calmly. About Ivana. Richard's face went pale. I don't know what she told you, but... Open the door, Richard. It wasn't a request. Richard's hand trembled as he undid the chain. The door swung open fully, revealing the interior of the Hendricks home in all its miserable ordinariness. Beige walls, worn carpet, the faint smell of stale coffee and something sour that might have been old food or just neglect given physical form. Richard stood in the doorway, suddenly very aware that he was in his underwear, suddenly very aware that the man on his porch didn't look like someone who knocked on doors to have reasonable conversations. "It's 3 a.m, Richard tried, his voice attempting authority and failing. "You can't just—" "I can," Aaron interrupted quietly. "And I did. Now step aside." Richard did. Aaron and Tobias entered the house like they owned it, which in a sense, they now did. Ownership wasn't always about deeds and titles. Sometimes it was just about who held the power in a room. Upstairs, a door opened. Regina appeared at the top of the stairs in a bathrobe, her thin face pinched with confusion and annoyance. "Richard, what's going on? Who are these?" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw them. Her expression shifted from annoyance to uncertainty to something that might have been fear. "Come down here, Regina," Aaron said. Not loud, not threatening, just certain. She came down the stairs slowly, her hand gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping her upright. When she reached the bottom, she positioned herself slightly behind Richard, as if he could protect her from whatever was happening. Aaron looked at them both, these two people who'd taken a vulnerable child into their home and systematically broken her down. They looked so ordinary, so unremarkable. That's what made it worse somehow. Monsters were supposed to look like monsters. "Where's Ivana?" Regina asked, her voice sharp despite her obvious nervousness. "What have you done with her?" "What have I done with her?" Aaron repeated, his tone dangerously soft. "That's an interesting question, Regina. Let me answer it. I fed her. Because apparently, that's not something that happens in this house." "Now wait just a minute," Richard started. "No." The single word cut through the air like a blade. "You don't speak. You listen. Both of you." Tobias had positioned himself near the door, not blocking it exactly, but close enough that the message was clear. No one was leaving until this conversation was finished. Aaron took a step closer to the Hendricks, and they both instinctively stepped back. "Ivana came into my restaurant tonight," he continued, his voice still quiet, still controlled. Barefoot, wearing a sweater that barely kept her warm. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. 3 days. Do you understand what that does to a child's body? To their mind? "She's exaggerating," Regina said quickly. "She's always been dramatic. We feed her plenty, she asked me for leftover food." Aaron spoke over her as if she hadn't said anything at all. "Not money, not help. Just the food I was about to throw away." That's how low the bar had become for her. Garbage was aspirational. Richard's face was red now. Whether from shame or anger, it was hard to tell. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, barging into our home in the middle of the night." "I know exactly who I am," Aaron said. "The question is, do you know who you are? Because from where I'm standing, you're 2 people who took a child into your home, a child who'd already lost everything, and you decided to break what was left. We gave her a home." Regina's voice rose, defensive now. "We took her in when no one else wanted her. We clothed her. You starved her," Aaron cut in, his voice hardening. "You hit her. I've seen the bruises, Regina. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending they don't exist." Regina's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "She fell," Richard tried weakly. "Kids fall. They bruise easily." Aaron's laugh was cold and humorless. "Kids fall. That's your defense? You're going to stand there and tell me that a 9-year-old girl has finger-shaped bruises on both arms because she fell?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Tobias shifted slightly near the door, a subtle movement that reminded everyone he was still there, still watching. Aaron continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to listen very carefully, and you're going to understand that this isn't a negotiation. This isn't a discussion. This is me telling you how the rest of your life is going to work." Richard and Regina stood frozen, like rabbits who'd just realized they were in a wolf's den. "Ivana isn't coming back here. Ever. You will not look for her. You will not file a police report. You will not call child services and play the concerned parents. As far as you're concerned, she never existed. You can't just take a child," Richard started. "I can. I did. And here's why you're going to let me." Aaron took another step forward. "Because if you don't, if you make this difficult, if you try to involve authorities, or make any kind of trouble, then Tobias and I will come back. And next time, we won't be talking." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. "You're threatening us," Regina whispered. "No," Aaron corrected. I'm making you a promise. You failed that little girl in every way two adults can fail a child. You took money meant for her care and spent it on yourselves while she went hungry. You hurt her. You made her believe she was worthless. And now there are consequences. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He tossed it onto the coffee table between them. That's $5,000. Consider it payment for your silence. It's more than you deserve, but I want this clean. You take the money, you sign the papers inside that say you're voluntarily relinquishing custody, and you forget Ivana Martins ever existed. Richard stared at the envelope like it might explode. And if we don't? Regina's voice was barely audible. Aaron's smile was cold. Then you find out what happens to people who hurt children in my city. And I promise you, Regina, you don't want to find that out. Tobias spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble. We know where you work, Richard. We know Regina's sister lives in Cleveland. We know you have a storage unit on 5th Street that you haven't told your wife about. We know everything. So think very carefully about your next move. The color drained from Richard's face completely. Aaron checked his watch. You have 60 seconds to decide. Sign the papers and take the money. Or refuse and spend the rest of your considerably shorter lives looking over your shoulders. Regina reached for the envelope with shaking hands. We'll sign. Good choice. Aaron nodded to Tobias, who produced a pen from his jacket. The Hendricks signed the papers on their coffee table, their hands trembling, their futures suddenly very uncertain. When it was done, Aaron collected the documents and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back at them one final time. If I ever hear that you've tried to contact her, or that you've taken in another foster child, this conversation will seem kind in comparison. Are we clear? They nodded mutely. Good. And then he was gone, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness with Tobias beside him, leaving Richard and Regina Hendricks to contemplate exactly what kind of people they'd become, and what kind of man they'd just met. The drive back through the city was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of Tobias's radio. Aaron sat in the passenger seat, the signed documents folded neatly in his jacket pocket, his expression unreadable as streetlights strobed across his face. Clean, Tobias finally said. Cleaner than I expected. They were cowards, Aaron replied, his voice flat. Cowards always fold when they realize they can't bully their way out. Think they'll stay quiet? They will. Aaron's certainty was absolute. Fear is a better motivator than money, and they have plenty of both now. They know what happens if they don't. Tobias nodded, merging onto the highway. What about the girl? Evelyn will keep her tonight. Tomorrow, I make some calls. There are people who owe me favors, good people who actually give a damn about kids. We'll find her a real home. You getting soft on me, boss? Aaron's jaw tightened. Drive. But Tobias was right, even if Aaron would never admit it. There was something about Ivana that had gotten under his skin in a way he hadn't expected. Maybe it was the way she'd asked for leftovers instead of demanding a meal. Maybe it was the resignation in her voice when she'd said, "They don't let me," like starvation was just another weather pattern she had to endure. Or maybe it was the bruises. Aaron had seen plenty of violence in his life, had caused plenty of it himself. But there was something particularly vicious about violence inflicted on someone powerless to stop it, on a child who'd already lost everything and was just trying to survive. It reminded him too much of his own childhood, of going to bed hungry while his father spent grocery money on whiskey, of learning to be quiet, to be invisible, to anticipate violence before it arrived. He'd sworn a long time ago that if he ever had power, he'd use it to make sure kids like him, kids like Ivana, didn't have to live that way. Tonight was just keeping that promise. Dawn was breaking by the time Aaron arrived at Evelyn's apartment. The sky had shifted from black to deep purple, and the city was beginning its slow wake-up routine. Early morning joggers, newspaper deliveries, the smell of coffee from a corner shop just opening its doors. Evelyn answered on the first knock, still in her pajamas, her eyes tired but alert. "It's done?" she asked quietly. Aaron nodded, stepping inside. They signed. They won't be a problem. Evelyn exhaled slowly, relief, and something else, maybe approval, maybe concern crossing her face. "You didn't?" "No," Aaron cut her off gently. "Just a conversation. Very persuasive, but just a conversation." "Good." Evelyn closed the door behind him. "She's still asleep. Cried herself out around midnight. Poor thing. But she's been peaceful since then." Aaron moved quietly through the apartment to the guest room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see Ivana curled under the comforter, one hand tucked under her cheek, her breathing deep and even. She looked younger in sleep, more fragile, Like if the world breathed too hard, she might shatter. I'll have placement options by this afternoon, Aaron said, his voice low. There's a couple in the suburbs, the Castellis. He's a teacher, she's a nurse. They've been trying to adopt for 2 years, but the system keeps jerking them around with red tape. They're good people. You've vetted them? Thoroughly. Aaron's eyes never left Ivana's sleeping form. They'll take care of her. Actually take care of her, not just cash checks. Evelyn joined him at the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. You know the system isn't going to just let you place her wherever you want. There are procedures, investigations. The system failed her. Aaron interrupted, his voice hard. The system put her with people who starved and beat her. So forgive me if I don't trust their procedures. I'm not arguing with you, Evelyn said gently. I'm just saying be prepared for pushback. Let them push. I've got the signed relinquishment papers. Legally, the Hendricks have given up all parental rights. All we need is a judge willing to expedite the placement, and I know several who owe me favors. Of course you do. Aaron finally turned away from the doorway to look at Evelyn. You think I'm overstepping? I think you're doing what you always do, taking impossible situations and bending them to your will. Evelyn's expression softened. I also think that little girl is lucky you were in that restaurant tonight, luckier than she knows. Luck had nothing to do with it. She was desperate enough to ask a stranger for food. That's not luck, Evelyn. That's tragedy. And you're trying to fix it. I'm trying to make sure she doesn't end up like... Aaron stopped himself, the words catching in his throat. Like you? Evelyn finished gently. Aaron didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Evelyn reached out and squeezed his arm briefly. You turned out okay, better than okay, despite everything. Did I? Aaron's voice was bitter. I run half the underground economy in this city, Evelyn. I solve problems with fear and money, and occasionally, violence. That's not okay. You also just saved a child's life, Evelyn countered. In the middle of the night, you went to that house and made sure she'd never be hurt again. Whatever else you are, Aaron, you're someone who gives a damn. That counts for something. Before he could respond, there was a small sound from the bedroom, a soft whimper, like the beginning of a bad dream. They both froze. Ivana shifted under the covers, her face scrunching up, her breathing becoming uneven. Her hands clutched at the blanket, knuckles going white. Evelyn moved first, slipping into the room and kneeling beside the bed. Hey, sweetheart, she whispered. You're safe. You're okay. Just a dream. Ivana's eyes fluttered open, confused, frightened, taking a moment to remember where she was. When she saw Evelyn's face, some of the panic faded. Evelyn? Her voice was hoarse with sleep. I'm here. You're still at my apartment. Still safe. Ivana's gaze drifted past Evelyn to the doorway where Aaron stood, half-shadowed in the early morning light. Recognition flickered across her face. Mr. Calvo? He stepped into the room but maintained his distance, understanding instinctively that children who'd been hurt needed space to feel safe. Just checking on you. Making sure you slept all right. I did. Ivana sat up slowly, the blanket pooling around her waist. I had a nightmare, but it wasn't about them. It was about being back there, and you not being real. Like the restaurant was just something I imagined. I'm real, Aaron said quietly. And so is everything I promised you. You're not going back to that house. Never? Never. Ivana processed this, her young mind trying to comprehend a future that wasn't defined by fear and hunger. What happens to me now? Aaron moved closer and crouched down to her level, the same way he'd done in the restaurant. Now, we find you a real home, with people who will actually take care of you, people who understand that children need food and safety and kindness. It might take a few days to arrange everything, but Evelyn's going to let you stay here until then. Is that okay? Ivana nodded slowly. And Richard and Regina? You don't need to worry about them anymore, Aaron said, his voice firm. They can't hurt you now. They won't even try. I made sure of it. How? How? By making them understand that some things have consequences. He paused. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Ivana looked at him with eyes that seemed too old for her face. You scared them. Yes. Good, she whispered. 3 days passed in Evelyn's apartment like a dream Ivana was afraid to wake up from. On the first morning, she woke up convinced it had all been her imagination. The restaurant, the food, Aaron, the promise of safety. She'd spent so long surviving on scraps of hope that real kindness felt fictional. But then she'd smelled pancakes, and Evelyn had appeared in the doorway with a plate stacked high, butter melting down the sides, real maple syrup in a small pitcher. "Good morning, sweetheart. Hungry?" Ivana had nodded, still not entirely convinced this was real. By the second day, she'd stopped flinching every time Evelyn moved too quickly, stopped apologizing for existing in spaces, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, though part of her still listened for it. Evelyn never pushed, never demanded Ivana talk about what had happened or process trauma she wasn't ready to process. She just provided steady, gentle presence, showed her where the snacks were kept, help yourself anytime, you don't need to ask, taught her how to work the TV remote, let her take long showers without commenting on the water bill. Small mercies that felt monumental. On the third morning, Ivana woke to voices in the living room, adult voices, speaking in low, serious tones. Her heart seized immediately, old instincts kicking in. Adult conversations were never good news. She crept to her bedroom door and opened it a crack. Evelyn was there, still in her morning robe, coffee mug in hand, and across from her, sitting on the couch, was Aaron. He looked different in daylight, less intimidating somehow, though no less powerful. He wore dark jeans and a simple black shirt, his tattoos more visible without the suit jacket. "She's been good?" he was asking. "She's been perfect," Evelyn replied. Quiet, polite, almost too polite, if I'm being honest. Still acts like she's waiting for permission to breathe. "That'll take time." "I know." Evelyn sipped her coffee. "Did you find a placement?" Aaron nodded. "The Castells. I spoke with them yesterday. They're ready whenever we are. Their home study was completed months ago. They've just been waiting for the system to match them with a child. I'm bypassing the system." "And they're okay with that?" "They're desperate to be parents. They don't care how it happens, as long as it's legal." He pulled some papers from the bag beside him. "I've got a family lawyer handling the paperwork. With the Hendricks signed relinquishment and my testimony about the condition I found Ivana in, we can fast-track this through a judge I know. Could be finalized within a week." "That's fast. That's necessary." Aaron's voice was firm. "Every day she spends in limbo is another day she's not healing. The Castells are good people, Evelyn. I've had them checked out background, finances, character references. They're clean, they want this." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "And when Ivana asks why you're doing this, because she will. That girl is smart. She's going to want to know why a stranger cared when no one else did." Aaron's expression shifted, something vulnerable, flickering across his face before he locked it down. "Tell her the truth. That sometimes the right person sees something at the right time, and they decide to do something about it. That's not the whole truth, though, is it?" He didn't answer. Ivana chose that moment to open the door fully and step into the living room. Both adults turned to look at her, their conversation cutting off abruptly. "I wasn't eavesdropping," she said quickly, the old apology reflex kicking in. "I just heard voices and—" "It's fine," Aaron interrupted gently. "This concerns you anyway. Come sit." Ivana padded across the carpet and perched on the edge of the armchair, her hands folded in her lap. She'd borrowed another of Evelyn's old t-shirts, this one with a faded university logo and a pair of sweatpants that she had to roll at the waist. "How are you feeling?" Aaron asked. It was such a simple question, but Ivana realized no one had asked her that in years. How she felt hadn't mattered to Richard and Regina. It had been irrelevant data. "Confused," she admitted. "But better. Less hungry." "Good." Aaron leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I want to talk to you about what happens next. Is that okay?" Ivana nodded. "I've found you a family, a real one. Their names are James and Catherine Castelli. They live about 30 minutes from here, in a house with a backyard and a dog named Pepper. They've been trying to adopt for a long time, and they're very excited to meet you." Ivana's stomach tightened. "Do I have to go?" "You don't have to do anything," Aaron said carefully. "But I think you should. I think they could give you the kind of life you deserve." "How do you know they're not like—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Like the Hendricks?" Aaron's voice was gentle. "Because I made sure. I had people look into every part of their lives. How they treat each other, how they handle stress, what their neighbors say about them. They're good people, Ivana. The kind who'll remember your birthday, and help with homework, and actually mean it when they ask about your day." Ivana looked down at her hands. "What if they change? What if they're nice at first and then you call me?" Aaron pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "See this number? I'm putting it in Evelyn's phone, and we'll put it in whatever phone the Castells give you. If anything, and I mean anything, feels wrong, you call, day or night. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning. You call, and I fix it. Understand?" You'd really do that? Yes. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Why do you care? You don't even know me. Aaron was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because a long time ago, I was a kid who went to bed hungry, who learned that adults couldn't be trusted, who thought that was just how life worked. He paused. No one came for me, but I can come for you. So I am. Ivana felt tears burning behind her eyes. What if I mess it up? What if they decide they don't want me after all? Then that's on them, not you. Evelyn interjected gently. But I don't think that's going to happen. Mr. Calvo is very good at reading people. If he says the Castells are good, they're good. When would I meet them? Ivana asked quietly. Today, if you want, Aaron replied. They're waiting to hear from me. We can go this afternoon. Just to meet them, no pressure. You can see their house, meet Pepper, get a feel for things. And if you're not ready, we wait. Simple as that. Ivana looked between Aaron and Evelyn, these two adults who'd shown her more kindness in 3 days than she'd experienced in 2 years. She was terrified. Terrified of hoping again. Terrified of trusting again. Terrified that this new family would turn out to be just another version of the old one. But she was also tired of being afraid. Okay, she whispered. I'll meet them. Aaron's expression softened into something that might have been pride. That's brave, Ivana. Really brave. It doesn't feel brave. It never does, he said. But it is. Evelyn stood up and moved to the kitchen. Well, if we're doing this today, you need a proper breakfast first. Can't meet your new family on an empty stomach. As Evelyn busied herself with breakfast, Aaron stayed seated, his dark eyes still on Ivana. Are you scared? He asked quietly. Ivana nodded. Good. Being scared means you're smart. It means you've learned to protect yourself. He paused. But being scared doesn't mean you stop trying. It just means you move forward carefully. Can you do that? I think so. That's all anyone can ask. 3 hours later, Ivana sat in the back seat of Aaron's car, wearing clothes that Evelyn had bought her, actual new clothes that fit, jeans and a soft purple sweater that didn't swallow her whole. Her hair was clean and brushed. Her stomach was full. She looked like a regular kid, Aaron thought. Not the hollow-eyed ghost who'd approached his table 3 nights ago. You ready? He asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Ivana took a deep breath and nodded. Then let's go meet your family. The Castelli home sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees that were just beginning to turn autumn colors. The house itself was painted a warm cream color with dark green shutters, and there was a wooden porch swing that moved gently in the breeze. A basketball hoop hung over the driveway. Flower boxes lined the windows. It looked like the kind of house that existed in movies about normal families. Ivana's hands were sweating as Aaron pulled into the driveway. Still okay? He asked, putting the car in park. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The front door opened before they'd even gotten out of the car. A woman emerged, first mid-30s, with warm brown skin and dark curly hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple blue blouse, and her smile was nervous but genuine. Behind her came a man, tall and lean with glasses and graying temples. He had kind eyes, the first thing Ivana noticed about him, the kind of eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And between them, a golden retriever bounded out, tail wagging so hard its entire back end moved with it. That's Pepper, Aaron said quietly. She's friendly, won't jump on you. As if understanding, the dog stopped a few feet away and sat, her tail still sweeping the porch, her mouth open in what looked like a grin. Aaron got out first and walked around to open Ivana's door. She climbed out slowly, her legs feeling unsteady. Catherine Castelli approached carefully, stopping a respectful distance away. Hi, Ivana. I'm Catherine. We're so happy to meet you. James joined her, his hands in his pockets. Hey there. I'm James. Thanks for coming by. They weren't overwhelming her, weren't rushing forward with hugs or tears or expectations. They were just waiting, letting her set the pace. Ivana appreciated that more than she could say. Hi, she managed. Would you like to come inside? Catherine asked. We made cookies, and Pepper's been dying to meet you. She loves kids. Ivana glanced at Aaron, who gave her a small nod. Okay. The inside of the house was just as warm as the outside. There were books everywhere on shelves, stacked on tables, even a few on the stairs. Photographs covered the walls, mostly of Catherine and James at various ages and locations. The furniture looked comfortable and lived in, not pristine and untouchable like the Hendricks house had been. It smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. Catherine led them to the kitchen, where a plate of chocolate chip cookies sat cooling on the counter. Fresh out of the oven about 10 minutes ago. Help yourself. Ivana took one cookie, then another when Catherine smiled encouragingly. They were perfect, slightly crispy on the outside, soft in the middle, the chocolate still melty. Good? James asked. Really good, Ivana said honestly. Pepper had followed them into the kitchen and now sat near Ivana's feet, looking up with hopeful eyes. She wants a cookie, but she knows she's not supposed to have them, Catherine explained. The struggle is real for her right now. Despite herself, Ivana smiled. They gave her a tour of the house, the living room with its overstuffed couches and fireplace, James's office, cluttered with papers and teaching materials he taught high school English, Catherine's small art studio, where she painted watercolors in her free time, and then the bedroom that could be Ivana's. Catherine pushed open the door carefully. We weren't sure what you'd like, so we kept it pretty simple. If you decide to stay, we can redecorate however you want. Paint, posters, whatever makes it feel like yours. The room was painted a soft yellow. There was a bed with a white comforter, a desk by the window, a bookshelf waiting to be filled. It was bigger than her room at the Hendricks house. The window overlooked the backyard, where Ivana could see a swing set and more trees. There's a closet here, James said, opening a door. And the bathroom's just across the hall. You'd share it with us, but we're pretty low maintenance. Ivana walked to the window and looked out. In the backyard, she could see a vegetable garden, some outdoor chairs, a fire pit. We have cookouts sometimes, Catherine said softly, coming to stand beside her. Nothing fancy, just burgers or hot dogs. James thinks he's a grill master, but honestly, he's pretty average. I heard that, James called from the doorway, but he was smiling. Ivana turned away from the window. Can I ask you something? Anything, Catherine said. Why do you want to adopt? Why? Why me? Catherine and James exchanged a look not uncomfortable, just checking in with each other the way couples did. We've wanted to be parents for a long time, Catherine said gently. We tried for years to have biological children, but it didn't work out, so we decided to adopt. As for why you, specifically Mr. Calvo, told us about your situation, told us you needed a safe place with people who'd actually take care of you. That's something we can give, something we want to give. We're not perfect, James added. We'll probably mess up sometimes, but we promise to always try, to always listen, to make this a home where you feel safe. And if it doesn't work out, Ivana's voice was barely a whisper. If I'm too much or too difficult then we figure it out together, Catherine interrupted gently. Families aren't perfect, Ivana. They're just people who commit to showing up for each other. That's what we want to do for you. Show up. Ivana felt the tears coming before she could stop them. She tried to blink them away, but they spilled over anyway. Catherine knelt down, bringing herself to Ivana's eye level. It's okay to cry, sweetheart. Crying doesn't make you weak or bad. It just means you're feeling something real. They used to punish me for crying, Ivana whispered. Catherine's expression crumbled with compassion. We never will. I promise you that. Ivana looked at this woman, this stranger who was offering something Ivana had stopped believing existed. A home, a family, safety. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, James said immediately. Take all the time you need. No pressure. Back in the car, Ivana was quiet for the first 10 minutes of the drive. Aaron didn't push, just drove through the suburban streets back toward the city, letting her process. Finally, she spoke. They seemed nice. They are nice. How do you know for sure? Aaron glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Because I've spent my whole life learning to read people, learning to spot the ones who mean what they say, and the ones who don't. The Castells mean it. But what if... Ivana. His voice was gentle but firm. I know you're scared. I know trusting adults hasn't worked out well for you so far. But at some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let what happened define your whole life, or whether you're going to take a chance on something better. That's easy for you to say. It's not, actually. Aaron merged onto the highway. I lived in fear for years. Kept everyone at arm's length because getting close meant getting hurt. And you know what I learned? That's not living. That's just surviving. And you deserve more than survival. Ivana was quiet, absorbing this. What happened to your parents? She asked suddenly. You said you went to bed hungry. You said no one came for you. Aaron's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment, Ivana thought he wouldn't answer. My father was an alcoholic. he said finally. Mean when he drank, which was most of the time. My mother left when I was 6, never came back. So it was just him and me in a tiny apartment that smelled like disappointment. He didn't feed me regularly. Didn't care if I went to school. Mostly just cared about where his next drink was coming from. How did you survive? I learned to take care of myself. Learned to steal food when I had to. Learned to stay out of his way when he was in a mood. And when I was old enough, I left. And became. Ivana trailed off, not sure how to finish. Became someone with power. Aaron finished. Someone who could make sure kids like me, like you, didn't have to live that way. Is that why you helped me? Yes. Ivana processed this. The Castellas don't know, do they? About your past? They know enough. They know I found you in a bad situation, and I'm making sure you get somewhere safe. They don't need to know the details of my life. Will I see you again, after I move in with them? Aaron was quiet for a moment. If you want to. I do. Something in his expression softened. Then yes, I'll check in. Make sure everything's going well. But Ivana, I need you to understand something. The Castellas are going to be your family now. Not me. I'm just the person who got you there. You're more than that. Maybe. But I don't want to confuse things for you. You need stability. You need people who'll be there every day, not just when things go wrong. Ivana understood what he was saying, even if she didn't like it. Aaron had saved her, but he wasn't trying to be her father. He was trying to give her the chance to have a real family. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Aaron met her eyes in the mirror. You don't need to thank me. Just promise me something. What? Promise me you'll let yourself be happy. That you'll try. That's all I ask. Ivana nodded, tears threatening again. I promise. The transition happened faster than Ivana expected. Within days, the paperwork was finalized. Aaron's lawyer and his judge friend had expedited everything with an efficiency that bordered on miraculous. The Castellas were officially her guardians. Moving day was simple. Ivana didn't have much to pack, just the few items of clothing Evelyn had bought her and the stuffed bear from the guest room that Evelyn insisted she keep. Catherine and James picked her up from Evelyn's apartment on a Saturday morning. Evelyn hugged her tight, slipping a piece of paper into her pocket. My number, she whispered. You call me anytime, for anything. Thank you for everything. Thank you for trusting us, Evelyn replied, her eyes wet. The first night in the Castelli home, Ivana lay in her new bed, staring at the ceiling. She waited for the fear to come, for the other shoe to drop, for someone to tell her it was all a mistake. But all she heard was James watching TV downstairs, Catherine humming in the kitchen, Pepper's tags jingling as she walked past the door. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Dinner that night was spaghetti. Catherine asked her about her favorite subjects in school. She'd be starting the new school Monday. James told a terrible joke that made Catherine groan and Ivana smile despite herself. No one yelled. No one withheld food. No one made her feel small or unwanted. It was such a simple thing, dinner with people who actually wanted her there, but it made Ivana's chest ache with something she slowly recognized as hope. That night, before bed, there was a knock on her door. Catherine poked her head in. Just checking if you need anything before lights out. I'm okay, Ivana said. All right, we're right down the hall if you need us. And Ivana? Catherine smiled gently. We're really glad you're here. After she left, Ivana stared at the closed door for a long time, trying to remember the last time someone had said they were glad she existed. She couldn't. The nightmares still came, sometimes dreams where she was back in the Hendricks house, where the locks clicked into place, where hunger was a constant companion. But now when she woke gasping, she wasn't alone. Catherine or James would appear, offering water and gentle words, never making her feel weak for being afraid. Slowly, impossibly, Ivana began to believe in safety. True to his word, Aaron checked in. Never intrusively, just a text to Catherine every few weeks asking how things were going. Occasionally a phone call where he'd ask to speak to Ivana directly. How's school? He'd ask. Good. My teacher's nice. Making friends? Some. It's weird. Good weird. That's good, Ivana. That's really good. And every year, on the anniversary of the night she'd walked into his restaurant, a package would arrive. Nothing extravagant, usually a book, sometimes a gift card, once a framed photo of her and the Castellas that someone had taken at a school event. The card inside was always simple. Keep your promise. And she did. She tried. Some days were harder than others. Trauma didn't disappear just because circumstances improved. But the Castellas were patient. They celebrated small victories and weathered setbacks without making Ivana feel like she was failing. She learned what it meant to be part of a family. Real family, not the kind bound by paperwork and financial incentives, but the kind built on showing up, on choosing each other daily. She learned that crying didn't mean punishment, that asking for food didn't mean being difficult, that taking up space wasn't something to apologize for. She learned, slowly and painfully and beautifully, how to be a child again. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, she'd think about that moment in the restaurant, barefoot and desperate, asking a stranger for leftovers. She'd think about how easily Aaron could have turned her away, how most people would have, but he hadn't. He'd seen a child who needed saving, and he'd saved her. No fanfare, no credit sought, just action. She'd asked for leftover food. What she'd received was so much more. She'd received justice, protection, and the chance to rewrite her story. And that made all the difference. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.